Hi, welcome back to April World History Unit 2, Day 15. This is going to be the last day for this unit. So reminders before we get started, please make sure you have a history notebook out and you're taking notes as you move through the video. Make sure that you complete the vocabulary for this video, which will be on the next slide, and down in the description as always. Let's go ahead and get started. So our key terms are going to be Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, Tokugawa, Shogun, Samurai, Daimyo, Eta, Chonin, Chan Buddhism, Dutch learning, floating worlds, Saint Francis Xavier, Will Adams, and the Indian Ocean trade. Key concepts we're going to cover today: the political civil wars and beginnings of the Tokugawa Shogunate in Japan, social structure, changes and continuities in Japan during the early modern period, religious change in Japan during the early modern period, the effects of European exploration on Japan during the early modern period, cultural/intellectual life in Japan during the early modern period. So let's start the kind of the beginnings of the Tokugawa Shogunate in Japan to 1867. So in the 1400s or the 15th century, this is going to be a period known as the Warring States period. This is going to be when the big Japanese Civil War kind of breaks out. The kind of first kind of person try to kind of attempt to unite Japan is going to be Nobunaga and Hideyoshi. Now Nobunaga deposed the Ashikaga Shogun and tries to conquer Japan. He's going to be assassinated by one of his generals, which goes completely against Bushido. And so who's going to take his place? It's going to be Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and he is the ablest general to Nobunaga. He's a son of a peasant. He wants to break the hold of the Daimyo and the samurai. He temporarily unites Japan in 1590. He's going to invade Korea. He's going to threaten to invade China and the Philippines, but he doesn't really unite Japan as it needs to be. The person who's going to do that is going to be actually a general to Hideyoshi, which is going to be Tokugawa. Now Tokugawa, he is a general. He's from a minor family. He actually is going to be the one who wins the war, and he establishes the shogunate in 1603. He's going to move the capital to Edo, which is modern day Tokyo. He's going to reestablish stability. And he realizes at first he needs to control the daimyo, or the local lords. And because each daimyo is the absolute lord within the state or area that they control, so what he does is he kind of exerts his control as shogun over these daimyos. They have to live in Edo every other year. He controls who they marry, how much they spend on expenditures. They have control, but they can't collect taxes, personal taxes and things, to gain power and influence. So what he does is, yes, you're a daimyo, yes, you're a lord, you have all this social power, but you have no real political power in order to do what you're saying you need to do. So it kind of not eliminates the power of the daimyo, but it does hinder the power of the daimyo. So I said it's been a while since we touched on this, so let's kind of go over it again. So the Tokugawa government system, of course, you have the shogun, who's also the emperor, and then there's an emperor and there's a shogun. It depends on where we're talking about. But the emperor is honored as the head of state. The actual power was held by the shogun. Japan was an example of a central feudal state. The title of shogun was hereditary, just like a monarchy. Shogun was in charge of courts, finances, and appointed all officials. He was head of the army. He made all the grants to lands to daimyo. And all the daimyo really were land-holding samurai, like largely land-holding samurai. The daimyo managed their domains or feudal possessions. Then under the daimyo, you have the greater samurai, who owned land but not as much as the daimyo, thus restricting their power and social influence. And of course, you have lesser samurai who are just warriors. Now, if we were to kind of make these a little broader, we have kind of 4 classes, 5 really. Of course, you have just the samurai, who are going to be Daimyo, Shogun, Greater Samurai, Lesser Samurai. Underneath that, you have peasants. Underneath them, you have artisans. Number 4, you have merchants, and Japan kind of gets some influence from China for not liking merchants, and so it just kind of that syncretic kind of sharing of culture. And number 5, we have Edda, who are the outcasts, the impures. This is where you're gonna, and Edda is gonna be your prostitutes, your homeless, you're sick, you're unable, people like that. Members of classes were not allowed to change their social status, similar to that of the caste system. Others, we have priests and entertainers. They were mostly Edda, but at times they had their own kind of social system. Shoguns enacted laws covering hairstyle, dress, and accessories in order to maintain their Japanese culture. But during a period of peace between the 1700s, or the 17th century and 19th century, if your entire social structure is based off warriors, what happens when there's no warriors? So what the shogun does is that he puts the samurai on a regular salary, 1 koku per warrior, which is a ration of rice. We have the rise of konins, who are merchants. This leads to an increase in cities with more numerous populace, giving rise to more merchants. The lowest ranked people in society were those who profited off what other people produced, merchants. Farmers, the law outlined the duties and conduct of the farmers, reinforced by decrees that peasants could not own weapons. Over time, though, with all of these structures in place, the lines really begin to blur, and it kind of becomes less of a set system. Let's talk about some economic and social changes. So we have an increase in agricultural production. It doubles from between 1600 and 1700. The population grows by 33% from 1600 to 1700. The expansion of cities. This is due to American foods reaching Japan, which are easy to grow, which leads to more food equals more population. More population means more problems, right? So economic and commercial changes. The Japanese developed an intercoastal shipping. The construction of well-maintained national roads and bridges. Crafts began to include carpentry, stonemasonry, sake brewing, and lacquering. Japan traded sporadically with China, but they kind of try to maintain distance with China. They got American silver from China, though. And for a while, they had the most amount of silver in the world due to this trade, along with Spain. Now let's talk about Neo-Confucianism in Japanese culture. Neo-Confucianism, again, is loyalty and submission to family and to the existing social structure. Japan will implement a school of national learning to establish a distinctive Japanese identity, where they're going to emphasize Shintoism, which is very much spirits and ancestor worship and others. But Japanese Buddhism is also becomes very popular with samurai, especially Zen Buddhism. Now, outside learning, Tokugawa used outside learning if it was controlled and regulated. One of these things is going to be the introduction of the printing press to Japan, as well as Dutch learning. Japanese scholars were few. Japanese scholars were permitted to learn Dutch. European art, medicine, and science influenced Japanese scholars, but Japan did want to maintain its cultural identity, and they introduced what are known as floating worlds. These are centers of urban culture. These are going to be tea houses, theaters, brothels, right? Public baths. This is where art, poetry, novels are encouraged. This is where kabuki theaters. Kabuki theaters is where it's a theater where the actors wear a mask and kind of act out stories. And then you have bonraku, which is puppets, which act out stories, which becomes extremely popular. We also have the development of extremely precise tea ceremonies. and also development of martial arts. Um, and we have a kind of an art school, ukiyo, which depicts art, which depicts everyday life. Let's talk about Christianity in Japan. Christian missionaries, Dominicans, Franciscans arrive with the Portuguese. Jesuits come later. Most famous Jesuit's going to be Saint Francis Xavier. He's going to visit Japan. He's going to really kind of start to spread the new ideas of Christianity. He's successful in converting much of Kyushu, but Christianity threatened the social order. But Christianity really kind of was making headway until a gentleman by the name of Will Adams. Remember, Franciscans and Dominicans are Catholic, right? So Will Adams, who's an Englishman, is shipwrecked in Japan with on a Dutch trade mission. He's a Protestant, and he's an extremely gifted linguist who became friends and advisor to Tokugawa, and he'll become a samurai. Well, Adams was Protestant, and he hated Catholics, and he was very honest about the facts of Tokugawa, such as the Treaty of Torres, which the Pope said that Japan wasn't even Japanese, that it belonged to the Spanish. So Tokugawa was like, no. And so he starts his anti-Christian campaign, which will be launched by several Tokugawa shoguns. Many daimyo were in contact with Europeans for weapons. This was a big no-no. Buddhist and Confucians resented Christian exclusivity, similar with China. 1612 rolls around, and Christianity is banned in China. Tokugawa, he told the Christians to renounce their faith. Many did. If they did not, they were crucified. And yes, he crucified them ironically. Thousands of Christians will go underground in Japan and will not re-emerge until 1854. Now, this leads to a period of self-imposed isolation. The Tokugawa shogunate really sees the Europeans as a threat, especially guns. Guns threaten the social order. A peasant could fire one, which would totally invalidate the entire warrior social caste system. He's going to control context. Tokugawa banned Japanese from foreign contexts and travel and trading abroad. And shoguns adopted a period of isolation. Japan was closed to outsiders from 1630s to 1854. Foreign trade was under tight restriction, so much so that it was one Dutch ship once a year to come to Nagasaki. Despite this policy, Japan never became fully isolated because it's extremely difficult, but it was self-imposed isolation. Now let's kind of talk about kind of where we are in Asia at the end of this early modern period. Portugal, control over Indian Ocean declines. They were enemies toward the Spanish, the Dutch, and the English, and began to raid Portuguese territories. The Dutch established their own Indian Ocean trading empire that captured Malacca. They came to control the East Indies or Indonesia. They followed the Portuguese model of fort factory. They decided to monopolize the trade in the Indian Ocean. They established plantations, transport crops, spices, coffee. They conquered Java coffee. Right. The English lose the battle for spice to the Dutch, and the English really began to concentrate in India. The English made alliances with local princes against the Mughals, as many of the princes resented the Mughals due to their intolerance of Hindus due to Aurangzeb. So the English really began to kind of conquer and really kind of solidify their control of India. The English and really the Europeans really began to concentrate on controlling islands where the European naval superiority helped. The Dutch will conquer Ceylon, Java, the East Indies. The Spanish will conquer the Philippines. And the thing is, the Europeans are content to let the Asians and Asian empires retain their old systems, as long as they pay tribute to the Europeans, right? The Spanish and Portuguese really start to push Catholicism and missionaries. The Dutch and the English didn't care. And that's where we're going to end before we hit the Industrial Revolution. So that's where we're going to end for today. That's all I have for you for this unit. So thank you guys. Be prepared for a test coming up. But thank you guys, and I'll see you guys in class.